Alright, hello again guys. Um, this video is going to be in response to a lot of the questions that I'm getting regarding what not to do with the city. I'm also going to be answering quite a few questions that people have asked me, via the forums or on YouTube, and try to better explain some of this stuff. Now, this isn't going to be the only video. I'm going to do multiple videos of these. Because there's just no way to do it all in one video and show everything that people are wanting shown. So, don't worry, there's more coming if I didn't cover what you want. Just keep the questions coming and suggestions for videos, and I'll keep doing them. Now, the first part that I should really cover is the road system. People have been asking me questions left and right, what should I do with the road system? The videos that you showed, the road system works really good, but what about 100k pop, 200k pop, etc., etc.? And, first and foremost, let me say that there is no one correct way to doing road systems. But there's a lot of things that you can do wrong when you do your road system. Like, take, for example, mine. It's a mess. I started off with a grid right here, but as I went out, I let it get sloppy. I didn't keep it uniform. I did really long sections, really short midget sections, really long, parallel sections, and there's just not a lot of uniformity to my thing. And as I went on, things just got weird. I made it. Weird little squares, snakes. I didn't take account into traffic patterns, basic traffic patterns, stuff like that. So it caused and is causing a lot of issues on this map for traffic. One thing I pointed out in another video for starting out was, when you first have your map, you have the global road going through your map. And you should always take that global road and build an avenue off of it, like right here, going through your main part of your city, or right here. And the reason why is you want to do this is for a number of reasons. First and foremost, having a major avenue system in the middle of your residential and commerce is going to alleviate a lot of traffic. Because it's huge. It's a huge highway that can be upgraded a number of times. And secondly, it's easier to build off of and set your structure for your road system up. Now, as your city progresses and you build that avenue out through your city, that gives you more options to build that avenue out to different sections of your city as well, which will help alleviate traffic. Now, another thing that people have been asking me, and I've looked at a lot of people's cities and other videos, is they'll have avenues, but they won't build them until later on in the game. And I'm sorry for that. And they'll have avenues like way out on the side, or like this one, like I did to show for an example. I have this avenue, I started it here, went up and around my industrial complex for no apparent reason, and connected that with the link train over here to the streetcar depot, for no reason. It serves no purpose. It does no good like that. And a lot of people's, cities are set up like that because they didn't realize that they needed, that avenue in the very beginning of the game to set up their infrastructure. And so they end up having a whole avenue system that does their city no good at all. It's not utilized correctly, or it's not utilized at all, and it's just a waste of space and money. So, having that avenue built through your city from the get-go is going to help a lot. it's going to alleviate a lot of traffic problems like this. I mean, there's cars packed in here everywhere, and if I had that avenue going straight through here, straight up, and coming over here and coming down, or coming over here and coming down, all these people would be using, the shuttle system, which would be helping the traffic, throughout this main part, which it's not doing right now. And that's a very basic, basic explaining of, the streets and street systems. And if you are going to do a grid, you've got to keep it uniform. You've got to keep it, as close as a perfect grid as you can. If you end up doing, all these strange little boxes and squares and it's just not going to work, and it's going to cause more problems. Now, another question I got was, well, I have a grid and I have a 300k pop city and it's not working for me. So obviously you must be wrong and it's not possible to do. Well, that's not true. That has been disproven as of today, this morning. A nice gentleman on the EA forums for SimCity posted up a nice post, which I will link in the comments or in the description below. Has a very, very nice little 250k pop city, and it is pure grid and it works beautifully. And there's quite a few tricks which I won't go into, but you can read for yourself, which which really help making that sort of system work. Now, you don't have to do a grid system. There's other systems that you can do, and that will work just as fine as well. But if you're wanting a really high pop, high density city, then grid is going to have to work for you. Otherwise, it's going to be a complete train wreck for a lot of people. And I will show that later on. I'll show a city with higher pop and how I have the road system set up in a different video. But just know that it is possible to do. So keep trying at it. And also remember that the whole point of SimCity is you don't have to have a 300, 500k, a million pop little plot of land here. These aren't made for that at all. The region is made for that. You're supposed to branch out if you're playing by yourself and play in other cities, or you're supposed to rely on the other people in your region to help with population and city services and stuff like that. You don't have to do it all on your own, and I think that's where a lot of people are getting mixed up, because they're so used to the past SimCities where you do everything by yourself, and your city plots in the previous games were so large you could have these massive cities. It's not true in this game. Sadly, this is what Maxis has done. This is what they want. They want people to work with each other, or they want cities to work with each other. Okay, it's just the way it is. Now, going into another part of what people have been asking is, in a previous city I did was, low pop, high wealth, and how to correctly set up a starting city as well. And I've gotten a lot of questions of, you explained in your video, you should start small, stay small, and let it develop, and don't develop further outwards like I did in this video, or in this city. And could you show us what would happen if you develop too far out, or stuff along that lines. So as you can see here, I have all of this underdeveloped residential and commercial area, and this section right here, this square, is where I first started out. Okay, and then I built off to the left with my residential and commercial, and then I built the top right for industrial, and it's a mess. It's not clean. It's not a pretty little setup, and as a result, I didn't I just was doing what my 3-bar graphs and my little city planner people were telling me to do, which was zone more and more and more for, the demonstration of this video. And, as you can see, I didn't let anything develop, okay? And I didn't, correctly place my parks, my basic parks, to let it build up. And when I did place parks, they were medium parks. So, and as a end result, I have no kind of system for, low wealth, high density, medium wealth, high density, and, high wealth, high density. Because I didn't plan anything out, and I didn't develop my areas before I moved on. So, in the end result, what I ended up having was, all this right here is not developed whatsoever. All of this right here is all medium, and all of this up here is not developed. Okay? So, what I end up having is my entire plot, for the most part, with the exception of a little bit right over here, is not developed whatsoever. Like, it's not tier 2 density, it's not tier 3 density, and I'm losing so much money from these people being tier 1 density and not providing me with the proper workforce that I need. Right now, all I have is a huge medium density workforce. Since all of these low profit residentials are not developed whatsoever, and that causes problems. I have factories that are shut down and not working because they need workers. It makes a big difference. If you don't plan your city accordingly, if you just kind of wing it, then you're going to be in Bad News Bear Town. Later on, when you need a lot of this workforce or a lot of that workforce, and you just don't have it because nothing's developed, and you're going to have to break yourself or go bankrupt trying to fix everything that you did. And it's not good. So, as I stated in my other videos, you really need to stay small and start small. Otherwise, you're going to end up with an entire map covered with crap. But as you can see, my population is only 20,000. Whereas in my other video, my city's only developed, for like here, over to here, and down, with a little bit over here, and I've got about the same kind of population. So, the key is developing your property. If you don't, you're just going to have an entire map filled with, junk that's not developed, it's not making you money, and it's only hurting you and costing you more money. And I will show in another video, what a correctly zoned, in my opinion, and there's no right way, it's just for me, what a correctly zoned region for me is going to look like, with it all sectioned off and how it's done correctly. Because my city services, they're scattered all over, they're raising land value everywhere, which it's not good. Now, for this last part, I'm going to touch on a couple of different things and answer a couple of questions about power and utilities and stuff like that. And for the example of this video, I did a couple of different things. I placed a windmill because I'm in a high wind region, and I ended up boxing it off, like a lot of people make the mistakes of doing. And as a result, I'm not able to expand this wind region out. Okay. So what that means is I can only build 4 things here, and that's all the power I'm getting from this place, which is really severely limiting my power. And the same with here. I put this here in the wrong position, like a lot of people do. They wasted all that money, and it went down the wrong way. Instead of going to the left, it went straight down, and that resulted in a very limited number of wind turbines as well. So if you do wind, you really need to start correctly. Make sure that You're leaving your service roads lots of room to expand because they're going to need a lot of room to expand. You know, wind farms don't produce a lot of power with just a couple of turbines. They need a lot of room to grow, and you know, it costs quite a bit of money to use them as well. So keep that in mind. Another thing is solar power. Solar power is not a 24-hour game time, um, you know, giver of power. It takes a long time. I think it takes 12 to 14 hours to charge, then it gives you like 12 hours or 14 hours of daytime power. That's it. And it, by itself, it doesn't give you a lot of power. So you've got to keep that in mind as well. And you can add on to it, which does get costly. And for another example, which I did was, make sure you have proper placement of your services. You really want your garbage dumps and your sewage treatment plants, either with industrial or off by themselves, because polluting your water will cause a lot of issues as well. That's about it for this little video. I just wanted to touch on a couple of those questions that people have been asking me and clarify a little bit more on the road system and structures. And I will make more of these videos as the days and weeks goes on to showcase more advanced cities and stuff like that. But just make sure that you plan your city structure out correctly, and don't be afraid to play around, with multiple cities with the road structures. That's the best way to do it. And keep a target in mind of what kind of population you want to have. If you want to stay, a fairly low population, then a basic, very, very basic grid will work. If you want to go into the higher pops, then you're going to have to get more creative and do a lot of playing around to see how exactly it works. Oh yeah, and a lot of people have been asking me about workforce. I don't know what to do about unfilled jobs and workforce and this, that, and the other. And that's why I say, lay out different sections of your city for different, wealth residentials. That makes, later on a lot easier. For example, if, this whole bottom area was sectioned off for low wealth, and the middle section was just for medium wealth, and the top section was just for high wealth. Or, as someone else pointed out to me in the forums, was, you can just do, a low wealth half of your city, a medium wealth other half of your city, and then build into, start a different city with just high wealth, and they'll commute back and forth. You could do that as well if no one else is playing in your region. But, there's a couple of different ways to see, what's going on. If you go to, your zone screen, and these little bars over here, which, I touched on it in a different video, these are really key to a lot of things. Like if you click on population map, it'll show you what kind of people you have and where. Like it'll show you where your students are at, how many students you have compared to how many workers you have. And like for example, these green and purple, these are people at home. These are people that students, and it'll show you your shoppers, and it'll show you how many people are working and where. And you can kind of go off on that and see how much is taking up of your workforce, what is really low on workforce. It's not a foolproof system. It doesn't tell you, like for example, Dom's Dynamite is an industrial building, and it has a lot of people working there, but it doesn't tell you, it has 300 out of 300 people working or 150 out of 300 people working. It doesn't tell you that. It just shows you how many people there in a bar graph with no numbers. Kind of silly, I know. I wish it was more in depth than that to see what you needed. And you know, another question I get is, you know, how do I know what each one of these buildings needs for, you know, low wealth, medium wealth, or high wealth workers? And to be honest with you, there's no exact answer, because there's no system in game to tell you what these buildings are hiring. I mean, yeah, like high tech buildings are going to be hiring, you know, high wealth buildings, but they're also going to require medium wealth and low wealth workers as well. And there's no way of knowing at this current point in time what they need of each. So I mean, that's why it's really good to section your city off accordingly to, you know, low wealth and medium wealth and different, and you can just add as you need it, um, or upgrade what you have as you need it as well. You know, and another thing is, you know, this little population counter down here, you know, 31,000. You know, it'll tell you a history of your growth rate, but if you click on detail, you know, it'll also tell you how many unfilled jobs you have. Like, for example, in this city, I have 5,000, you know, unfilled low wealth jobs. And the reason why is because all this low wealth, you know, residential that I have zoned is not developed whatsoever. It's not medium or high tier density, so all these factory jobs, as you can see, are closed. You know, closed still needs workers, closed still needs workers. And as the graph you saw, like all of the graphs except for on one was crazy low, because I have no workers and nothing has been zoned. And you can use those two to kind of to work with each other to better help you understand what you need. So I mean, if you have, you know, a very very high demand, or you have a lot of low wealth jobs that are unfilled, like I do, I have 5,000. You know, the best thing to do is not like what was done in this city, which was zone more and more and more and more and more and more residential. No, you need to work on what you have and get like these initial, you know, residential squares down here zoned up for density. You know, keep them at low wealth and zone them up. You know, and that will end up bringing in a ton of low wealth workers, and keeping a lot more of this crap over here that was filled in because of that free to do with other things. But yeah, I hope this helped. Explain some things better. If, you know, as always, if you have any questions, comments, or suggestions on what I should add in my part 2 video of this, please feel free to leave them in the comments. Thank you, and have a great day.